I can get a bit more fine-grained than that. On the talks about awareness of self, I mean, again, awareness is I'm just using it very loosely here. The focus of really all three of these talks was quite different. Jesse focused on the question of experience of the self, and picking up on this Humean question about whether there is such a thing as an experience of the self. John's talk focused largely on beliefs, also utterances and sentences, but especially beliefs about the self. And Sidney's talk focused on a lot of questions about the self in general, but focused especially on issues about memories of the self and what do those involve and what distinctively makes them memories, first-person memories about the self. So 3 different ways of thinking of the relevant relation there: experiences, beliefs, memories. Right onto the bottom there. Ignore the bottom of the screen. This was some quickly packed together PowerPoint over lunch. Awareness of one's properties. We've got Alex, Brent, Eric, Fred, Nathan on. Here the relation actually was fairly uniform. In most cases the relevant relation, maybe even all cases, the relevant relation was knowledge. Knowledge of one's properties, and again mainly mental properties. What varied between these talks was questions about what sort of properties the relevant kind of knowledge is of. Alex talked about, well, a few things, but I mean, the main focus was on knowledge of one's desires, also knowledge of one's beliefs, knowledge of one's intentions along the way. Brent focused on knowledge of one's qualia, which is roughly something pretty close to knowledge of one's experiences. Eric focused on knowledge of a bunch of properties, experiences, conscious phenomenology, certain kinds of non-conscious attitudes, and also knowledge of personality traits and moral character. Maybe that's the reason for the qualifier here, mainly mental. I mean, you might argue that personality traits and moral character aren't precisely mental properties, although they're closely connected. Fred focused on knowledge of one's thoughts, or one's thinking, and Nathan focused on knowledge of one's beliefs. Ignore the residue at the bottom. Okay, so that's one way of dividing things up. Another division and the different approaches we've seen in the course of the conference is a division into what we might call optimists and pessimists about self-awareness. So first approximation, the pessimists are focusing largely on problems with the relevant kind of self-awareness or self-knowledge, suggesting that kind of self-awareness is difficult, maybe non-existent, maybe impossible, at least problematic in certain respects. So I guess here Jesse would count as a pessimist about experience of the self, thinking there is no such thing. In different ways, Brent, Eric, Fred, Nathan are all pessimists about knowledge of one's properties, especially one's mental properties, raising doubts about the reliability or the ease of that kind of self-knowledge. On the other hand, there are a few optimists about self-awareness. I see the pessimists outnumber the optimists here. I don't know if that's sort of something congenital to the philosophical condition. Optimists about self-awareness here are trying to vindicate the relevant sort of self-awareness, perhaps to explain it or to say something positive about it. Perhaps, not in all cases, but perhaps in light of the kind of difficulties raised by the pessimist. So I take John Perry to be an optimist, taking it the beliefs about the self are possible and trying to give an account of just how they're possible, what they're grounded in. Sidney focusing on memories about the self, again takes us to be possible. Focusing on how that's possible in light of the Humean point that we don't have a simple experience of the self, instead gives some kind of causal model. Likewise, you can see what Alex is doing on knowledge of one's beliefs and desires and so on, is trying to develop a model of how knowledge of those states is possible in light of the kind of difficulties raised by Fred and others tied to the transparency of belief and thinking. I guess I'm congenitally optimistic by nature, so I'm probably going to end up in the second category as well. Specks and specks of pessimism along the way. Okay, one big common substantive theme. That's a formal division. roughly so far. One common substantive theme in a lot of the talks has been the theme of transparency. Transparency is this idea that, it's intuitive. We look through some of our states as if they were glass, to see seeing what's on the other side. I mean, this is most commonly associated, I think, with one's mental states and one's experiences. But one could broadly read this as applying to the self as well. I mean, this Humean point, there's no experience of the self, no direct experience of the self, which goes back to Hume and was discussed by Jesse and Sidney. You can put this by saying, one looks right through the self. Here I am, I'm a self, but I look right through the self and I just find these mental properties, my perceptions, my experiences, and so on. So the self is in a certain sense transparent. I don't have any direct experience of it. It's one thing. Likewise, on the other side, the thought, there are no experiences of one's mental states, no experience of thinking, no experience of being conscious, no experience of awareness, no experience of seeing. Rather, you look right through. You're not aware of those things. You look right through your experiences and perceptions out there at the world. So, I don't find I'm not aware of my experience of blue. The thought is, I'm just aware of the blue out there in the world. That's the Moorean point. Goes back to Moore, who characterizes the term diaphanousness. Our experiences are diaphanous. We look right through them at the world. Actually, I guess if you put these two kinds of transparency together, you get a kind of a worrying model. I guess our position is like someone enclosed in a sphere of double-glazed glass, or something. You look through the self at the experiences. But boy, those experiences, that's just another level of glass. So you look through the experiences right out there at the world. I mean, I hope there's not a philosopher out there who thinks that the world itself is transparent. There's another way of getting it, just a way of looking straight at the self. Otherwise, we're just going to have a whole bunch of lights spinning forever in a frictionless void. So this is the transparency model, and a lot of the talks can be seen as arguing for aspects of this model or considering self-knowledge in light of the transparency model. Now, this being said, it's not really totally clear what transparency comes to. I've glossed this by the claim there's no experience of the self, there's no experiences of mental states, and then given this different gloss, one looks right through the thing at other things. I mean, it's useful, I think, to look at some of the original quotes about these things, going back to various figures. We've seen most of them already, but it's worth doing. There's the famous quote from Hume that Jesse took as a starting point. For my part, when I look inward at what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure, or the like. I never catch myself without the perception, and never observe anything but the perception. I suppose on looking at that quote, transparency isn't quite the best way to put it. He doesn't say anything about looking through himself. It's almost as if rather the perceptions are obscuring the self. The self. I mean, maybe Hume doesn't even think that the self is there to be found, but the perceptions in a way are serving as a barrier. You don't find the self behind it. It's almost as if this was I don't know, that kind of unidirectional glass that you can look through one way or not the other. Those sunglasses that you look out of, but no one can look in. Here's the self on the inside, and here are my experiences, and I look out through my experiences of the world. But you can't see through the shades from the other side to see the self. I guess it's got to get a bit more complicated than this. But, maybe I can see myself on the inside. But anyway, you get the idea. So maybe it's not really a transparency model, but an obscurity model. I mean, I guess on Hume's own view that maybe there is no self. There's actually nobody home behind the shades. That's the Hume quote. Then there's the famous Moore quote from G. Moore on diaphanousness. The moment. And Moore is talking here about our knowledge and our attention of consciousness, the self, the relation of awareness, the relation of seeing a blue thing. Let's separate the blueness from the awareness of blueness. So it's very hard to find that awareness, that consciousness. The moment we try to fix our attention upon consciousness and to see what it is distinctly, to see what distinctly it is, it seems to vanish. It seems as if we had before us a mere emptiness, when we try to introspect the sensation of blue,